Our history is no more than a series of incredible events. Every one of us can influence its course. From the birth of a 1,000-year-old empire to the death of a flourishing civilization. From the creative genius of a handful of men to a worldwide cultural revolution. From the darkest of totalitarian visions to the most horrific of great wars. From the heroic resistance of an entire people to the iron determination of a minority. The most infinitesimal of our decisions can influence the future of humanity. To know the past is to foresee the future. Chicago, November 12, 1955. It's a big day for the multimillionaire businessman. Not surprising, he has just been elected head of the state with more than 75% of the vote. For Governor Capone, the question is, who didn't vote for me? The son of immigrants, Al Capone has climbed every rung of the criminal ladder. At 45, he was already the undisputed boss of the crime syndicate. Becoming a millionaire through sales of bootleg liquor, the gangster is now a respectable and super rich businessman. His property empire, built on the corpses of his former enemies, is today 100% legal. But none of this ever happened. In 1930, a tiny grain of sand will change the course of an investigation and toss Al Capone behind bars on Alcatraz. December 18, 1917. Under pressure from the influential Wayne Wheeler, the U.S. Congress adopts the 18th Amendment. February 14, 1929, St. Valentine's Day. Al Capone's henchmen execute 7 members of a rival gang. October 24, 1931, the gangster Al Capone is sentenced to 11 years in jail for tax fraud. These 3 events are key moments in the rise and then the fall of the most notorious American gangster, Al Capone. England, 1620. The Mayflower has just set sail for the New World. Aboard, 200 Puritans determined to flee persecution. They are driven by the conviction they need to found a new society in America, a purer and strictly Christian society. For them, all pleasure is suspect, temptation is too great, sin is never far. 2 centuries later, the United States, made rich by wave after wave of immigrants, remains profoundly steeped in the ideal of those first pioneers, rigid discipline in life and unshakable faith in God. And yet, right in the heart of the Republic, alcohol flows freely. In 1830, the average citizen drinks the equivalent of 88 bottles of whiskey per year. Alcohol is everywhere. When not working, men go to the saloon. There they talk business, politics, but they also drink their fill. And at that time, there is no form of protection against conjugal violence. The impact on family life is devastating. All levels of society are affected, from workers to judges, as well as the preacher. However, in the mid-19th century, more and more voices are raised to denounce the evils of alcohol. This movement, born of Protestant ceremonies, will spread and grow. Its objective? Cleanse the country by abolishing the consumption of alcohol. This is the beginning of the long march towards Prohibition. Across the country, women will emerge from their homes to mount an assault on drunkenness. Blockade of saloons, demonstrations, political pressure, wrecking of establishments. All methods are good to make their voice heard. And they succeed. At the beginning of the 20th century, some 10 American states have gone dry, with no alcohol. But for Wayne Wheeler, the most influential politician in the United States, this is not enough. At the head of the Anti-Saloon League, he wants more than a simple law. He wants to carve prohibition into the marble slab of the Constitution.
On December 18, 1917, after a century of struggle, Congress adopts the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, banning the production, the sale, and the transport of spirits within the territory of the United States. So at this point, the restriction only applies to hard liquor. But just before the amendment comes into effect, the Volstead Act completes and extends the ban to all drinks containing more than 0.5 degrees of alcohol. For Americans, it's time to take a last drink.
Welcome to the memory of humanity. Here we can control time, analyze and compare billions of events and alter them to rewrite history endlessly. All the events in our history, however minute they might be, are memorized and interconnected. It only requires one to be changed for all the others to be shaken to the core. For example, let's try to understand the effect of alcohol on the human body. Alcoholic fermentation is a chemical process during which sugars are turned into ethanol. This procedure has been known to man for thousands of years. When swallowed, the alcohol arrives in the stomach and then in the small intestine. It passes into the blood from which it spreads to all the organs, in particular the liver and the brain. The first effects are slight euphoria, a partial lifting of inhibitions and an increase in reaction time. But in high doses, motor functions are affected, leading to possible vomiting, loss of consciousness, or even death. Over the long term, excessive consumption may trigger numerous diseases, sometimes fatal ones. As often the case, it's all a question of moderation.
Total ban on consumption of alcohol. For a large number of Americans, it's something of a joke. One law amongst others that, in any case, will never be applied. But the saloons start to close one after another. Distilleries fire their workers. Stocks are impounded or even destroyed. A special target? The breweries, generally run by German immigrants. Clearly, this is for good. The law is applied to the letter, and zealously. The first positive effects are quickly felt. Fewer deaths, no more drunks in the streets, less brawls outside bars. For the saloon owners, there are only two options left: respect the law, or turn their cellar into an illegal bar. It's the birth of the speakeasies, the hangout of the scofflaws, where you can order your bourbon from the barman, but only if you whisper. To supply them, the bootleggers, or smugglers, dream up increasingly ingenious strategies. Out in the country, they start distilling their own alcohol, often at night, in the woods, by the light of the moon. To drink and flout the law soon becomes not only a desire, but a duty too. People think the government has no right to dictate how they behave. Even the President of the United States has his own personal stock at the White House. The speakeasies become the new temples of fashionable society. Places of worship in an amazing age when women have won their place next to men at the same time as their right to vote. A time when jazz and the blues are almost more intoxicating than bootleg whiskey. A time when the cities are sprouting skyscrapers. A time outside of time. The Roaring Twenties. In the first 20 months of the application of Prohibition, 100 million liters of bootleg alcohol are consumed, right under the nose of the state. To fight the recalcitrant element, the feds dispose of a budget of a mere $3 million. On the ground, they have one agent per 70,000 population. For the city of New York alone, it is estimated they would need 250,000. And the same number to watch over those very agents, because the administration is no fool. Corruption is rife. From neighborhood cops who turn a blind eye to the federal agents who hold the secret dives to ransom, the house is rotten from basement to attic. Then, the gangs grab the trade.
The power to ban. Passing a law is one thing. Being able to apply it is another. The 18th Amendment ran against the majority of opinion. It was all about an influential group imposing its vision of things and its morality on an entire country. By choosing to defy this law, considered to be unjust, a large part of the population stepped outside the law. What would happen in France if a pressure group banned cheese or wine? What if tobacco were made illegal? How many people would cross the line? The whole question, a difficult one to decide, is to determine whether a ban is just or not. Should we legalize cannabis, heroin, firearms? In every case, it's as much about the removal of individual freedom as a problem of health or of public safety. The question is made even more complex when we know that any ban is immediately met with the emergence of an illegal smuggling network. Doesn't the result risk being worse than the cause?
1917, New York. In the fog of alcohol and tobacco, a jazz concert can quickly turn into a settling of scores. The man slashed with a razor won't easily forget what just happened. Of Italian origin, he is a member of the New York Mafia. His name is Alfonso. Soon he's called quite simply Al Capone. The son of immigrants, Al Capone starts right at the bottom of the ladder. Spotted for his special talents, he becomes right-hand man to gangster Johnny Torrio. Of a violent character, he leaves New York for Chicago in 1918. He needs to disappear. But retirement is asking too much of Capone. With Johnny Torrio, he orders the murder of the local godfather and immediately takes his place. Bootlegging, dives, prostitution, racketeering. Capone dips his toe into everything crooked. He's violent and dangerous, acts fast, and strikes hard. The authorities are no threat. They are easily bribed. His real enemies, the Irish gangs from the northern neighborhoods. And this is no time for compromise, but for conquering territory. Under pressure from Irish bullets, Torrio flees Chicago and returns to Italy. Alone, Capone wages a merciless war with his sworn enemies. The authorities, corrupt, look away and allow him to clean up. Whoever controls the liquor traffic controls Chicago. And yet, in the eyes of the general public, Capone enjoys a Robin Hood image, the Prince of Thieves flouting an unfair law. Colorful and a media darling, the crook doesn't bother to hide. Opera, fur coats, dog races, and armored Cadillac. He taunts the authorities, defies his opponents, and even makes the front page of Time. At barely 30, he is all-powerful in Chicago. The state of Illinois, corrupt from top to bottom, can no longer stop him. February 14th, 1929, St. Valentine's Day. 7 members of the Irish North Side Gang have a meeting in a warehouse to take delivery of a load. Suddenly, cops appear. Nobody resists. The Irish mobsters know perfectly well that they'll soon be free. They are told to put down their weapons and line up against a wall. Capone's men, disguised as cops, riddle the mobsters with lead, then calmly leave under the cover of their uniforms. Behind them, a pool of blood and still smoking shells. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre will deeply shock public opinion. For the authorities, it's the last straw.
Always more. The gangsters who defy prohibition will wage a real war. At first, armed with simple revolvers, they equip themselves with automatic weapons and ever more powerful vehicles. The famous Tommy gun, designed by General Thompson, can fire 700 rounds per minute. This high rate of fire and its intensive use by the gangsters earn it the nicknames Chicago typewriter or piano. At sea, Coast Guard vessels, now faster and faster, disrupt the smugglers, who respond by converting airplane engines to drive their launches. At high speeds, these engines, running on aviation fuel, risk overheating and explosion. For each new weapon, a fresh response, always more effective. It's a race to violence.
Atlantic City, May 1929. The entire underworld is gathered today to put an end to the violence that is harming business and splitting up territories. This gangster conference is to lay the foundations of a crime syndicate for the United States. United, they will be able to bribe whomever they wish. Capone, richer than ever, is a leading figure at the meeting. However, this hard-to-control Italian starts to irritate. Fearing he'll be murdered, Capone gets himself arrested and finds temporary refuge in jail. However, other people are out hunting for public enemy number one. On the shores of Lake Michigan, more and more voices are raised against the mob stranglehold on the city of Chicago. Financed by a mystery committee dubbed the Secret Six, Special Agent Eliot Ness, reputedly incorruptible, is given the mission of putting Capone behind bars. President's orders. The investigator surrounds himself with a reduced squad of reliable policemen, hand-picked, experts in their field, weapons handling, offensive driving, phone tapping, hand-to-hand combat. Rather than attack the bars, the visible tip of the iceberg, Ness decides to target the source. He tells the delivery trucks, working back up to the breweries and distilleries. A series of spectacular raids ensues. One after another, Capone's wells dry up. But the gangster has to face another danger. Ness and his squad are merely the muscle of a wider operation. While Capone was fighting tooth and nail for his breweries, Special Tax Agent Frank J. Wilson was sifting through his life, his accounts, his assets. Strangely enough, his mission is not to prove that Capone was in breach of prohibition. His weapon is a recently passed law. From now on, all income, even that derived from illegal activity, must be declared for tax. The gangsters are caught in the trap. If they don't declare, they are charged. If they do declare, it's an admission of their smuggling. However, for the moment, it's impossible to link Capone to his vast fortune. The wily villain only ever pays in cash and keeps no written evidence of his dealings. Then, one day in 1930, Inspector Wilson happens across a forgotten item in the file. In this account book, a note mentions a certain Al.
We have just reached a turning point. A turning point is a key event, a crossroads in our history where the world swings one way or the other. Special Tax Agent Wilson has just unearthed an old file seized during an earlier search. In the file is a handwritten note, seemingly ordinary, incriminating a certain Al. When subject to expert analysis, it will provide a trail back to Al Capone. What would have happened if this document had remained under a stack of files? Unable to link the mafia man to his activities, the investigation would have gone on for years. Years in which Capone would have continued his relentless progression. At the head of a powerful crime syndicate, he would have had the financial and political means to bend any judge to his will and any senior civil servant. He might even have been tempted by a political career. After rigged elections, the biggest gangster of all time could have found himself at the head of the state of Illinois. A gangster at the head of a state.
Al Capone, undisputed boss of the Chicago underworld, has to face 23 charges before a federal court. The legal machine is in motion, and its aim is to put the crook behind bars once and for all. Confident and arrogant, Capone doesn't see that the wind has turned. True to himself, he bribes the jury. But to general surprise, the implacable judge has the jury replaced. Clearly more talented at handing out a beating than dealing with tax matters, Capone makes a poor choice of lawyers. His defense makes several mistakes. On October 24, 1931, the verdict is announced. Capone is found guilty of tax evasion and is sentenced to 11 years in jail. The villain was beaten by an accountant. Handcuffed, escorted by Eliot Ness, Capone has lost his permanent smirk. The comedy is over. The infamous Al Capone will rot away for years in the no less infamous Alcatraz prison. The agents of Prohibition won that round, but they are soon to be disenchanted. Because in the meantime, on October 29, 1929, the American economy suffered one of the worst days in its history, Black Thursday, the day when 13 million shares sold at rock bottom, when the stock exchange collapsed, when America was brought to its knees. This unprecedented financial crisis goes global. Soon faced with economic chaos, the restrictive Puritan prohibition laws no longer seem relevant. The state needs money and wants to bring back taxes on alcohol. Despite the millions of bottles seized and the more than 53,000 sentences, Prohibition is finally defeated from the inside. On February 20th, 1933, Congress adopts the 21st Amendment, which repeals the 18th. Each state remains free to manage the alcohol question as it sees fit. But the federal state decides it is no longer its problem. Gangsters are the biggest losers in the change. Legal alcohol is sold much more cheaply. They turn to other interests. Because, luckily for them, the United States has no shortage of laws to break, restrictions to get around, vices to pander to. But that is another story.
The history of the United States is written to the rhythm of its crusades against slavery, alcohol, communism, and today, Islamist terrorism. On each occasion, laws were passed to restrict by force and establish a virtuous America. Prohibition was a rearguard action led by Americans of the old Protestant stock against the new American immigrants. The 18th Amendment is the last great victory of these defenders of the past. Taking advantage of the windfall, gangsters like Al Capone were able to pervert that formidable American spirit of enterprise to create a real crime syndicate. Ironically, Prohibition opened the country's doors to the mafia. In the United States, individual freedom is a founding value. In a country where everyone has the right to do what they want and live life as they understand it, education is often more effective than imposition.